Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are today. My name is Amanda, and I want to welcome you to this TechStrong learning experience. We are excited to have you join today's program. It's going to be a great topic, and we've got great speakers. Just a few reminders before we get started. This session is being recorded, will be available afterward on demand. We will also send you a link to your inbox once we conclude today's live session as well to view. We also invite you to join us in the chat as we want to engage with you. Feel free to send your questions, your comments, or understanding of today's topic to the Q&A panel. This can be found on the right side of your screen. And then last but not least, we also have some handouts and resources available for you in the handout section. Those are available for you to download as well and yours to keep. Feel free to utilize this along with today's session topic. And without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off today's topic, navigating VMware to AWS, the fastest path to success. And today we're going to have Mitch Ashley moderating. Mitch, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
I would love to. Thank you so much, Amanda. Great to be here with everybody. We, our topic today is really talking about this strategic imperative, but also it's been prompted by the disturbance in the force with Broadcom acquiring VMware and some changes that have happened there. We're going to get into some of the drivers behind moving to the cloud, moving to AWS. But I first wanted to thank our sponsors, both AWS and Caylent. And we have a couple of folks here who are experts from Caylent. Again, we are recording this, so sit back. It's going to be conversational. We're going to be discussing this. There aren't slides, so you don't have to death by PowerPoint. We're all good. Nobody will harmed in the making of this learning event. And I think we'll have some great discussion with that. So to that end, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear both where you're joining us from today. Type it into chat. But we also want to hear your questions because we'll be addressing those as we go along. Type them into the Q&A tab. Also, just your reactions, your thoughts, your comments as we're discussing this. You can say, hey, I had a similar experience, or, I ran into this issue around Gen AI. Or somebody told me this, or whatever. I really liked what Zach said, or Mark had a good point there. Whatever comments you have, share those with us in the chat. And we'll use that as part of our conversation. Matter of fact, oftentimes that in the Q&A helps really guide and shape our conversation. So we're happy to include you to be part of the discussion today. To that end, let's go to our topic, talking about the move to AWS and the cloud, moving from VMware onto some alternative platforms, if you will. So I have the great pleasure of being joined by two folks from Caylent. First is Mark Olson. Mark, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. So Mark Olson, for the past 3 years or so, I'd led the pre-sales solution architecture team of Caylent, talking to customers just like yourselves that are joining today on the best way to get out of the on-premise environment. And a lot of that conversation is the best way to leave VMware behind and move to AWS. I'm recently transitioned into a role leading some of our enterprise customers, but still looking forward to moving some more VMware workloads. We also have Zach Tuttle with us today.
Hello, I'm Zach Tuttle. I'm a Principal Customer Solutions Architect here at Caylent. My role is essentially trying to dive deep with customers in their technical challenges and see how we can help them and how we can resolve those issues they may have.
Very good, very good. Well, we mentioned AWS and Caylent are sponsoring today's conversation. Both of you have joined us from Caylent. Mark, would you set some context so that folks know who we're talking to and what all Caylent does? This is not a big sales pitch. We're not going to be pushing product, but we are going to talk about a lot of the experiences that you have and from doing this with customers and capabilities. So it's going to come up, and let's set the context for folks.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, AWS needs no introduction, but Caylent would be new to a lot of folks on the podcast today. So Caylent's an all-in AWS premier tier professional services partner. Basically, to expand on that is all we do is AWS. But we do that across a number of areas. Our practice specializations span everything AWS does, from applications to big data and AI. Well, most of what we'll talk about today relates to our experience with migrations and DevOps in that practice area. If we look at how we define ourselves internally, we're thinking about ourselves as a next generation cloud services company that involves leveraging AI and our AWS expertise to transform and to bring customer ideas to impact. And that's the end of the sales pitch.
Okay, very good. Nice job. Nice self-contained. Appreciate you doing that. Well, I mentioned at the opening, there have been changes, of course, with Broadcom acquiring VMware. I think most folks, if they're not already readily aware, the impact of some of those pricing changes. But there's other reasons too. People are considering going to the cloud. Maybe they were thinking about some other alternatives besides VMware, whatever it might have been. Love to hear your thoughts on, as you're talking with customers, even prospects, even, what are some of those problems or drivers or reasons why people are thinking from, moving from on-prem onto an AWS?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I'll take that in two parts, right? So there's some underlying trends that have been true for a number of years now, and there's some recent developments that you've already alluded to with Broadcom making some changes. Uh, Starting from our experience, what's been true for years now as we've worked with AWS and customers, like AWS is at this point built a platform that no single company could realistically recreate. So the on-premises environments that we're moving from are just, they're not going to be able to rise to the level of engineering that AWS can afford to invest in, thanks to their economies of scale, their own first-party hardware engineering. They're able to price this super aggressively to outcompete like typical on-prem or hosting environments. And it's more than just like moving to somebody else's hardware and VMs. With the AWS managed services, they've taken a lot of what they might call undifferentiated heavy lifting or the operational toil that customer teams would get involved in, and now redirect that to more productive activities. So building new applications instead of worrying about patching and migrations in the same way that on-premise environments had. So that's been true increasingly for, well, probably a decade now, or approaching anyway. More recently, though, Broadcom, with its VMware acquisition, they've sort of changed the economics for VMware customers that have still been on-prem, that have been holding out on their cloud migrations. I think, first of all, they radically changed their licensing. They're raising their prices and they're bundling some of their software SKUs or software products that were previously independent, where you could pick and choose. Now they're forcing some customers to go to a single software SKU. I think they're drawing it down to two, which are the prices that are going up concurrent with that. So it's been kind of wild. Thinking about the customer reactions that we've seen from that, like financially, the increase and the cost increases that Broadcom is pushing down radically change the return on investment of a migration. If you model in these future cost jumps, it's pretty easy to see that getting away from a platform that's going to have those crazy increases is cost positive. And then the other thing that we're seeing in the field too is just apart from the invoices or the sticker shock that people are going to get, customers are proactively just sort of plain angry at the way this has been rolled out. And they're either creating or accelerating their own programs even before they get that sort of first surprise invoice, so that they're ahead of it and don't need to worry about it. I guess to bring just one real world example that was reported in a number of news outlets, so I feel like there's some veracity to it. AT&T just last month was claiming that VMware by Broadcom was offering it a 1,000% price rise. I've never seen anything like that, so I sort of scratched my head at it. But 10x on what you're paying for licensing in any operational function. There's no way that's built into IT budgets. There's no way that's built into sort of the cost models of what customers are expecting and building out. So those are sort of the more recent drivers for Broadcom. But actually, to hear more from the audience, let's put up our first poll. We'd like to hear what's motivating y'all in the audience to migrate. And meanwhile, I'm going to turn it over to Zach to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the migration drivers that we're seeing. And then we'll come back around as the poll comes in and focus more on the areas that folks are interested in today.
Yeah, thanks. Let's see here. So yeah, please feel free to send any questions about what we're talking about in the Q&A or respond to the poll, and we will make sure and prioritize our answers accordingly. So yeah, some of the things that we see, or maybe I guess issues that we see while we're delivering these migrations for customers, surprises that we tend to see, and unknowns that we want people to plan for before kind of going out into doing one of these migrations. Some of the things are one of the things that we see commonly with our customers and that we definitely help them with, but we see it a lot, is not a, let's say, a honest evaluation of their internal team skills. So you want a good understanding of where you're at on your journey when it comes to automation, when it comes to, DevOps, whatever you want to call it, platform engineering, things like that. You just want to have a good sense of where you're at currently before you make the move. And you want to make sure that you kind of stretch yourself. Like don't go 4 steps further. Don't say, hey, we're all a point and click admin shop here, and we want to start doing fully automated CI/CD pipelines for our infrastructure. We want to take steps, but you want to take one step forward. You want to push yourself just to take that one step as part of it. We find that the migrations that tend to have the most issues are the ones where they try to stretch a little bit too far beyond their team's either abilities or timeline or bandwidth or things like that. So that's just something to call out. Make sure that you're kind of evaluating your team's skill sets before you do that. The other thing that I tend to see a lot of will be mostly Windows related, and I am a longtime Windows administrator, so I'm not hating on the platform. It just tends to have more complications when you're moving into the cloud, and so we like to talk to customers, and we like to make sure that they're planning out their Windows AD, making sure that they're doing things like planning out what their AD is going to look like within the cloud. Are they going to extend their domain? Are they going to, do a multi-forest type situation? Things like that. Just a general thing. Make sure and think about Windows AD. It's a foundational piece. And what you'll see from all these things is that you're trying to set a really good foundation to move into, and make sure that it's nice and smooth. So Windows AD, that's one big one. Make sure that you have that covered. MS SQL is similar. Have a plan for that. Are you going to host yourself? Are you going to move it to EC2? Are you going to run it yourself? Or are you trying to take advantage of some of AWS's service like RDS, right, to save on some of your DBA's time? There are some pros and cons to that. It's good to evaluate it and understand what you can do within AWS. The other big thing is networking. We see a lot of kind of migrations go without long-term planning on complex networking scenarios. So if you do have any requirements around, networking that is, let's say, operationally difficult to manage internally, maybe you have a setup where you require single egress and ingress for your internet access for all systems and people, and it requires, packet inspection for everything, right? You need to plan on this, and you need to plan it out within the cloud and how that architecture is going to look. So make sure that if you are doing anything, let's say, interesting with your networking setup, to make sure and just, be ready for that. Look at what your options are within AWS. There's many ways to do things. There's many ways to do it right, and there's many ways to do it wrong. And so you need to really plan it out and make sure that you have a good foundation in place. Again, those are kind of some of the big ones that we see. And let me see if we see any results for the poll.
Yeah, let me summarize that for folks here. Basically, the leading response was avoiding future cost increases. Not surprised by that. And I think, Mark, you did a nice job saying that not just price increases, it's the way the packaging, bundling of products was changed. The second, not too far, that was about 56%. Second behind that at 40% was improving scalability and flexibility. Is one of the things that folks expect to gain out of the cloud, right? Not always sure how to do that or the best way to do it. And last, kind of a distant last, but was reducing some of the operational burden. And I can imagine that's different depending on where you are on your own, kind of your company's journey of on-prem and wanting to move to the cloud. Mark, any reactions to that? I don't think we're too surprised about cost being the first one chosen. But
no, 100% is. Especially in the current environment with higher interest rates where money is no longer free. I mean, we've been living in this environment for a couple of years now, but it's no surprise. We hear this in our customer conversations that driving down costs is a key driver. And the right now, the Broadcom license fees are the most obvious low-hanging fruit for a lot of customers. Mm-hmm. But the interesting too is Zach brought up Microsoft SQL. I think another corollary there is, Zach, if you wanted to talk a little bit about maybe moving from Microsoft SQL to other platforms can be a part of this journey as well.
Yeah, it can absolutely be part of the move. I would say more so than ever. In my memory for MS SQL, it's been easier to get off of MS SQL than it has ever before. AI has been really helping our ability to do that with some customers that have very complex SQL environments with things like multiple thousands of stored procedures. We not to get too salesy again, but we do have a offering called Polyglot that can assist with that and really reduce engineering time. So we've seen it be where it's financially not feasible to move off of MS SQL because of the people hours that it takes to do the rewriting of your stored procedures, the rewriting of your just your app logic and things like that. But now it's actually the numbers make a lot more sense. So if you are a company that is ever looking at kind of, hey, we're tired of paying these MS SQL licenses, which can be quite extreme as well with the enterprise version, it's very, very feasible these days to move off of it for a relatively low cost compared to what it used to be. So we have quite a lot of those projects going on, moving off of MS SQL to, one step is to, Babelfish on Postgres as a kind of a middle step to do it, or you can do the full move onto a non-licensed platform like Postgres. And we've had a lot of success doing that, and customers love it because it enables them longer term to get off the licensing completely across the board. That unlocks them to be able to start rewriting their apps within like .NET Core for Linux, getting off the MS Server licensing, things like that as well. So yeah, that's a big passion of mine. I again, as an ex-SQL admin, while I appreciate the platform, it's costly, and so customers want to cut those costs.
Well, and that's, we talked about cost, some of the drivers, and licensing for VMware is just one part of the picture, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, you're not going to whole scale change everything, but when you're making a migration, you're moving to the cloud, that is a time where you can say, this is a good time to make the switch on that part of what we're doing from.
Yeah. There's opportunities to even like at a smaller scale, right? Where you can kind of get that muscle stronger, right? Understanding, like, taking it as the chance to start working on one aspect of the longer term plan as part of it.
Yeah, we're running this on Windows. We're not using anything font that's Windows. Maybe we use something else to help save a little bit of money like that. Well, let's do this. I love, it's great to talk about where we want to go and why we want to go there and the stuff moving there. But I think just knowing my own cloud journey, it's always, what don't I know that I don't know? And I have a lot of questions myself. So it's sort of the challenges, maybe some of the barriers to getting there. But it's also, one of the advantages of working with someone like a Caylent is, some of those things that I don't know. Some of the questions I don't know to ask. So let's talk about what some of the challenges or barriers might be. Zach, if you want to kick us off on that.
Yeah, I mean, really, some of it besides the stuff I talked about with Windows issues and stuff. One of the big barriers is going to be your team, your people, your understanding and skills. While we can do, very quick lift and shift type migrations where you just move stuff over, a lot of it is going to you're going to realize a whole lot more cost savings if you kind of look at it and take a measured approach. And kind of split up that migration and do it in the proper ways. Not all lift and shift. Lift and shift is great sometimes for speed and things like that, but you're also kind of moving the tech debt with you over into the cloud. So you're not getting that kind of clean start. You're also not really changing or upgrading the skill sets of your team. You're just kind of treating AWS as another data center. And that's not where its true power lies. While it is very effective at that, its true power it really lies in those services that kind of Mark spoke about a little bit with the undifferentiated heavy lifting. It helps with that, and that's where that's where it really ties in.
Great. Did we have a poll we want to put up there, Mark? Is this a good time?
I think in just a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different customer journeys briefly and sort of how we see these projects playing out. To your point, Mitch, about some of your experience, maybe you can chime in and share what you've seen as well. The one thing I'd add in terms of barriers too is often what we see is it's a mental barrier for customers that see a Netflix that's very vocal about the kinds of advanced patterns that they're using, and everybody thinks that you need to go from this on-premise environment that's running a certain way to a wildly cloud native environment, and that's not the case. So just turning the page a little bit in terms of the way we see projects roll out. Really, the way that Caylent approaches it, we follow what AWS calls their migration acceleration program. We feel like that breaks these projects up into phases that make sense for customers. The way that breaks down is 3 different phases. It starts with assess. You can think about that as like a strategy and planning phase. The next phase would be mobilize. The way that we think about that is your cloud foundations and some initial workloads so that you're not just setting up a shell for future needs, but you're getting some real workloads running and starting to gain that experience with your staff. And then finally, there's a migrate and modernize phase that talks about migration waves and organizational transformation that gets really interesting. What I would say is that these are sort of fungible. You can play with these if we've got a customer recently maybe has a 75 VM migration that they're doing. We're going to smash these all into one phase and we're going to knock it out because it didn't make sense to belabor the migration with a long strategy phase. In other cases, we have customers with tens of thousands of VMs, and those definitely need an assess phase with some strategy and planning. And Zach's going to get into some of the details of some real-world customer experience that we have to share so that it's not just an abstract. And I won't go into it more than that, but having the experience to mix and match and understand how to match the business needs is really the key to that first thing in terms of thinking about phases. And then talking about patterns, especially as it relates to VMware, we've seen in cloud migration the sort of number of R's, if you will, go from 5 to 6 and now 7 in AWS's latest guidance. Some of that involves retirements and things that aren't relevant to getting out of VMware necessarily or directly. What we'll normally talk about is the rehost pattern, which is colloquially known as lift and shift. Thinking about it is just shifting boxes from your premises today or your colo today to AWS. Pretty straightforward approach. Some of that's a positive. It's really straightforward, easy to understand. The potential downsides we see for that is just you're not transforming those workloads, not running necessarily any more efficiently in AWS than you were in your data center, but the speed sometimes draws that one out. Next one I talk about is replatforming. So this is a bit of a lift in a platform as a service adoption. So AWS has a number of cloud native services. We talked about undifferentiated heavy lifting earlier, but also has some replacement services like Zach alluded to networking. Maybe you want to replace an expensive networking vendor with AWS native load balancers. That's potentially a good platform as a service to adopt along with the VMware migration. Using Amazon's relational database service to do managed database hosting so that you're no longer managing clusters and storage and worrying about failover, letting AWS do some of that work for you. And then another example is just like the EFS or FSX services for block storage. So those are just a couple of the examples, but there's some low hanging fruit that you can think about as you go beyond just a pure lift and shift. You don't necessarily have to run your SANs the same way that you did in your current environment. And that we're talking about trying to get out of VMware quickly today. I do think that's still amenable to that. Whereas the third point of a refactor, where we're talking about modernization, like this is where probably not the fastest path to escaping VMware, adopting cloud native services. Again, like not everybody has to be Netflix. They're super cloud native for a reason, for their scale. But I do think there's some opportunities, and Zach alluded to a couple of them earlier, where modernization can be low-hanging fruit in terms of retiring some of those other license fees. So moving from .NET workloads on Windows to .NET Core running on Linux with the assistance of some AI accelerators, and then also like modernizing databases from SQL Server, Oracle onto Postgres, and doing that with some AI-assisted both conversion and testing. I think those are some opportunities that may be within reach if they really make financial sense, or can be a fast follow to a migration. But ultimately on the customer, like as we think about customer journeys, and again, this is something Zach alluded to because it is so common, people and process aspect that's, you have people, process, and technology. If you think about that three-legged stool, people and processes get potentially considerably disrupted. And so that's a place to be thinking ahead of, and it can help to have a partner that's been there before. As a bit of a shameless plug for Caylent, like knowing the different patterns that customers have implemented to help train their staff or help change processes or adapt processes that need to be well governed into a cloud native environment is something that takes a little bit of time. Other thing to think about in terms of your people, if you're a leader, bandwidth for folks, there's going to be some inevitable double duty supporting both legacy systems and a new cloud environment, and thinking about how to manage that gap, whether it's a change freeze or making change slushy or rolling in waves or affecting teams at a time. There's a number of different patterns that you can look out for staff overwork, because it's easy to forget that you're running sort of in two different worlds for a short period of time during migration.
If I can jump in, I just want to reiterate one thing that you said. We talked about the three patterns: rehosting, which is kind of a lift and shift; replatforming, moving to using some of the services that are kind of native to AWS, load balancers. Maybe you're using a database service, DynamoDB, instead of something you've got now, or whatever it might be. Storage, of course, S3 and other options, and then refactor or modernize, right? And one of the complications, just sharing my own experience, is if it's moving one app, it's okay. You can kind of assess and plan for that. We wish we only have one app to move most of the time, right? Since we're talking about VMware, we're talking about really all things that are running on that, or potentially everything. Yeah. So moving it all at once can be a real challenge, because sometimes you've got to unwind it from things that are as connected to applications, databases, services. It would be really complex to move it all at once. So part of that planning stage is working with you to say, all right, I have some things I have to undo and unwind to be able to move things. How do I figure out what to do first? And because we're going to learn while we go too, learn working with you as well as leveraging your skills. Can you share some experiences around that, helping people undo the puzzle and re-put it back together in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, I'll head to Zach real quickly, but my first thought is like, what, everybody doesn't have a up-to-date, fully accurate CMDB that all the dependencies are mapped out, and we can just take a look at that and plan migration waves. The sarcasm aside, I think Zach's seen this in anger in any number of customers, so you really speak to that well.
Yeah, and I mean that's the rub, isn't it? I mean that's the challenge. So like in reality, kind of as you alluded to, the real, it's not real. You're never doing a full data center lift and shift, and that's it, right? You're never doing a replatform of everything or refactor. It's always a mix of everything, and so it really is having. That's what that assess phase really is for. Is evaluating everything and really trying to make a plan for each individual service, and it's not easy, but it's good. It's good to do thoroughly, especially on the larger migrations. So yeah, I mean, in reality, it's just going through each individual service, getting inventories together, getting all the stakeholders involved, getting, all the service owners, whatever your method is for managing your infrastructure, understanding where they're at with their services, finding all those appliances, those third-party vendors that might also have those expensive licensing, looking at the migration plan for those. That's kind of a part that we don't always touch on in these conversations. Is we focus on VMs most of the time, but there's really quite a lot of services. There might be load balancers, there might be firewalls, there might be tons of other things, proxies, and those we want to evaluate as well. And those we love to replatform, because generally the AWS services are 90% there, if not 100% there, to replace them, and they're low cost compared to the competitors. So there's a lot of advantages there, and that actually kind of ties into a Q&A question that I saw. Somebody said, saying that moving to VMware to AWS is really going to be profitable if we do a simple lift and shift. But if we take advantage of containers, to which extent is this going to change the relationship between infrastructure and operations teams and the development teams? And so we're kind of getting into maybe let's call it the DevOpsification of your company. But what I mean to say though is that there's still a lot of cost advantages that you can have from moving to AWS without having to containerize everything. Those third-party services you can use those and save quite a lot. But if you are doing the lift and shift without considering any of that, yeah, the cost savings is not going to be giant and significant. Where you really get into it is when you start looking at those services that save both people time and expenses. So going to containers is great. It's a path that most of our customers are going on in some level, but it's not the primary cost savings mechanism for moving to AWS.
Yeah, that's containerization has many advantages. One of them is just being able to move things around a little bit more seamlessly. That's easier, of course, in the cloud.
Yeah.
One of the things about lift and shift, the scenario, and this is one I lived through, is if you're facing a hardware refresh in your data center, that now you're talking about, not laying out cash for a 5-year investment or whatever. Now you're moving to a services model.
Yeah.
So that can be a good one. But in most cases
sure.
where that's not true, that's not, your cost is not going to be your big drivers when you make some of those changes of, deplatforming off of, VMware or Microsoft or whatever it might be that you're using to something else.
Yeah, and you know what? When you're in that situation, it's also important to consider that because your hardware might be a little aged, when you don't always do a one-to-one comparison with AWS services in that way, right? Because your hardware is probably quite a bit slower than what you would be running within the cloud, and so it's not always the best comparison to do an apples to apples to what you have on-prem to VMware, which all those nuances are kind of what we work with customers to help figure out and figure out where that sizing comes into play, services and things like that.
It's not the early days of cloud either. You mentioned, Mark, Cloud Foundation that AWS has, which is really kind of another way of thinking of patterns, different approaches of kind of architecting and moving to the cloud. Anything you or Zach want to share about Cloud Foundation if folks aren't aware of that, familiar with that?
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
We definitely have some customer stories that I will say that most of our customer stories start with Cloud Foundation. There's a few different names for it that we use. Sometimes it's a landing zone accelerator, it's control tower with landing zone, it's things like that. But in general, it's so important that generally when we work with customers, one of the first things we ask is, do you have a control tower or landing zone in place? If not, let's please do that as step one, because it really sets up let's say a mostly done environment that is secure, that we're confident in, that it's preset in a way that we would want it, and we kind of know where we're at and how we can build on top of that. It's really critical though. We have if you guys don't mind, I'll kind of talk about a customer real quick that we did that with specifically. You know what? And while I'm talking about that, let's maybe publish the next poll because it kind of leads into that. So I'll go ahead and do that. But we have a customer that we worked with, Sigfig. I like calling them out because speaking of the Cloud Foundation, they use kind of a unique one that we don't always see in customers, but when you need a more powerful and customizable landing zone, they use a product by AWS called Landing Zone Accelerator. And that's a kind of a unique one that's used for customers that need maybe just a little bit more configuration options for their landing zones. But Sigfig was growing very, very quickly. And they were kind of having issues during the pandemic when it came to, because they were having rapid growth with their customers. And so they really needed to kind of start scaling and modernizing. And so they needed to, we helped them move to AWS. We helped them set up their production environments. And one of the key things that really helped them is they were spinning up environments frequently, and their environment spin-ups were taking months at a time. So if you've been there before, you've done it, you've gone into your VMware environment, and you might have imaging, you might have automation, you might have strong PowerShell scripts, things like that to be able to automate these things, but they still take time, and they still checklists. There's still kind of manual innovation, and there's still kind of click ops going on and stuff like that. And it still takes a lot of time to do. So those were months to get a prod environment up. And with all of the landing zone accelerator setup, with all of the pipelines that we set up with them and the automations and stuff, that moved down to less than a week for deploying a full production environment for them. So that's huge, right? So that's not necessarily talking specifically about VMware costs, but that is talking about agility, that is talking about speed, that is people costs, right? That's months of time that you don't have to pay for to spin these things up. And so there's huge advantages that they got from doing that.
Yeah, we have kind of a comment question by Rajiv talking about when we speak about licensing, subscription versus perpetual kind of approaches is a simplified way of thinking of. There's a lot of other factors to consider of, terms of when things have expired, when, VMs were here and I'm up for my Microsoft agreement here and I have these other vendor costs and what does their licensing look like and moving those things to the cloud. So it's kind of a complex puzzle that you want to assess all of those things as part of your ROI to say,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense, then here's our move strategy, or at least it informs part of it. Am I in base with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's not, I mean, there's way more advantages to moving to AWS than just saving VMware licensing costs, right? So there's a lot of other factors that you should definitely consider. That's definitely not the only thing. So we have, I mean, this is only a recent thing. We've been moving, VMware customers to AWS for a decade, and that, they're not doing it because of licensing costs completely, right? They're doing it to take advantage of all the like what I just mentioned with Sigfig. They just mentioned they're taking advantage of the agility that they gain from it, and things like that. So yeah, like you mentioned, it's a complex equation, and you have to kind of look at what your business needs are and your IT team's needs are, and evaluate based on that for sure.
Great. Let's do a quick readout on the poll here, and love to get your reaction here. Maybe we can share a few other kind of case study customer examples. Now the results of that are which, excuse me, talking about customer journey, kind of what describes you best. The most popular answer, about 2/3 of folks, is gradual scaling as you need to grow. Second was managed platform, followed closely by large scale complex migration. And we had kind of everybody voted for at least one on all of them, rapid migration, so slow and steady. So that says to me, people are in different places and it's got to match, it's the, it depends answer, right? Where you are and what, not only what the drivers are, but what the outcomes you want to have from that migration. Mark, thoughts on that, or maybe some other examples of customers you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it's sort of there's a bit of a bell curve around that poll result that looks very similar to what we see in the market. So everything from small customers that are growing quickly to large customers that need to go in waves over a 3 to 5 year plan in some cases. So that's interesting to see in that respect. Yeah, I think actually, but before I move on to customer stories, I wanted to go back to the chat. I think so. Oh, you had Rajiv's. I see Sylvan's had a wasn't in Q&A. It was in Q&A. Sylvan was talking about VMware to AWS and taking advantage of containers. We did touch on that. I think the thing that I would add to that, in terms of the people changes involved, it was asking about the infrastructure and operations teams interacting with development teams. And I do think it's it's often a challenge. It depends on how well those teams get along today, but often we need to find ways that the infrastructure and operations teams are often the ones that get their hands slapped when there's an outage, and the development teams are the ones that are trying to sow chaos in those folks' environments. And so that's sort of a typical relationship that we would see among those teams. And finding a way that we shift some of the responsibility back to the dev team in terms of the guardrails that we have in the environment and the variables that they can change, and building them automation that keeps things on a better track for the operations teams. I think it opens up some great conversations around that. I don't. It's going to change it. The question was what's the extent of change among those teams, and I think it's significant, and it can be very significant in some customers. But I think it's necessary for to adopt the kind of pace and change and take the advantage of the cloud services in the way that that AWS offers.
What
I
you
don't know
said,
if that I don't know if the perfect answer,
collaboration.
Sylvan, to your questions, but yeah, that's absolutely a concern that we see in every customer. And like as we think about it as consultants working alongside customer teams and coaching with what's worked in other customers and sort of provable results is one way to help bring leadership on those sort of separate teams together and helping to pull together, knowing that other people have going to cross that chasm as well.
It's also a good opportunity. Yeah, I mean, there are traditional boundaries and silos and all those things that tend to happen in organizations, but you've got to bring the whole team together, whether it's infrastructure and security, data, development, all elements have to be part of the planning and execution at, different points of time. So it does help you bring some of those things together, because folks are also learning new things too on that journey. It's not like one group's the expert at it and everybody has to follow them. It's one you have to do together. It's the only way
Yeah.
to make it, right?
Yeah, and we see customers in all different stages of that kind of journey from your kind of standard old school way of that kind of divide between devs and operations, and very advanced platform type companies that are doing you have the SRE type work and things like that. And honestly, in my opinion, what I've seen from customers where this kind of journey works the best is small changes and iterate, kind of that agile methodology, but where you're all communicating, you're all working together, you're all trying to meet the same goal, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. There's no real like magic, formula to do it. Depends on your team, the work style, the kind of work they do, how advanced certain teams are with their either automation or things like that. But it's small iterative changes over time that help develop into that. Again, it's similar to what I said with moving to the cloud. We really want customers to take just like that one extra step, push it a little bit further, but not try to make those wholesale changes, because it's, especially if it's during a migration or during this there's already so much going on that you don't want to overwhelm everyone with so much to track that everything just gets bogged down.
Yeah,
That said,
go ahead.
Mitch, you tried to lead us back to a customer story, and I'll let you get us there now. So apologies for the divergence, but
No worries.
going with the idea of gradual scaling, they got the most traction in the poll with the audience. I think we have a good example. One of our customers is an American jewelry company. Can't be more specific than that without being under NDA, but they essentially took a measured approach because they had applications spread across 3 different clouds and on-premise infrastructure. They had IT sprawl. They had cost and operational challenges you might imagine with a complex environment like that. And then essentially the other piece too is wanted to minimize disruption for them during key sales events, like you can imagine Mother's Day, sometimes Father's Day. So there's some spikes in this customer's workload, as well as they're very important to their annual revenue. This is actually something that we came to earlier in terms of talking about like understanding the portfolio in a complex way. So in this case, we actually use AWS's built-in migration tools to assess their workloads, how they fit together, and create a plan that minimizes the impact to their daily operations. So I think with gradual scaling up, that's one of the things that we do see is that workloads get segmented well, understand what can be moved with fewer dependencies, and gradually adopt. And as that muscle grows with the operations teams, it's easier to start to migrate more quickly, or you're migrating more confidently those additional workloads. And that's what worked well for this customer. Zach talked about laying a foundation. This customer started with their back office application. So things like simple as SFTP front end and back end, AD servers, business intelligence, and some of those platforms they happen to be SAP users. So that's an idea. Like you take a small chunk, something that may not be business critical right away, and then start moving more workloads that are increasingly more business critical into that platform. So that's easy to see in waves, and it gives you the ability to string together some wins. You're not waiting for some big bang at the end of a 12 or an 18-month project, but you're getting a series of wins with your with your internal organizations. You're getting to retire hardware VMs incrementally. So worked really well for them. again, this is the place where we started by implementing Control Tower, and they happened to be using the Account Factory for Terraform variant because they were a Terraform shop. And just started with that central, well-governed infrastructure, and then built it up from there. And then incrementally taking down like VMC, VMware Cloud on AWS, some Oracle CRM and other CRM applications came down. So it really was about building a foundation and working upon that. But they couldn't take the risk of doing something that was fast and all, and it was just too complex a portfolio for that.
Any, I don't know if we've talked about this one yet, but any example of the kind of large complex, the sort of burning platform we've got to get off and make this change, whatever, but it's a large, complex operation.
Yeah, we've got one for that. I'll let Zach talk to that one.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, we have one that was, I think, 48 data centers that they're moving. And so that's I would consider that large.
That'll get your attention, yes.
Yeah. And so they had a lot of, of course, a lot of tech debt in those data centers, and they wanted to make sure that they're just, updated. They want to move quickly. They want to do all those things that you get out of the cloud. They had, quite a lot of different services that are, I guess, more interesting. Lots of IoT type stuff, lots of AI ML services that they wanted to add to view their data. Because when you have 48 data centers, you have a lot of data. ML and AI become a real thing when you have that much data available to you. So this was one that was not necessarily move quick because it's large. So you do have to take this at a measured pace, but the large ones do have that opportunity to both modernize as you're moving and migrate. So because there are so large, there's so many multiple teams, it really becomes advantageous to looking at kind of more, let's say, managed services for existing services that are maybe redundant across those data centers. Maybe you have 40 different versions of firewalls across those data centers, right? And you can standardize on one single AWS firewall. Things like that really help for that. But I think with this one, there was about 4,500 servers. And some of it was a little bit of lift and shift. Some of it was modernized. Some was database migration type work and modernization. But so that's what this one was. It's phased approach, right? There's going to be some services that you're going to retire, some services that you're going to have. Maybe you have services in a different cloud that you want to move over to AWS first, get that there in your foundation. And then basically doing that, usually starting with the database. A lot of times we look at that. That's the big ball of gravity is the database. And so we'll start moving those first. In this case, we did move first. And then start moving over the different instances to it. In this one, in the end, the server workload reduced by about 30%. So we're able to retire or refactor or replatform those by about 30%. So they've gotten quite a bit of savings because of that, right? That's a lot of servers that are no longer online. But those are large, complex projects. They take multiple years, a lot of times, more important than anything in those is that initial kind of assess phase, and the foundation again. So it's critical to have a really good plan for those, looking at what is critical, understanding all the team's needs, and getting alignment within the customer on which is moving first and what's prioritized and things like that is almost as important as the technical decisions.
One of the things about moving to an environment like AWS is it's kind of like moving to a new town and not sure where everything is. And part of the guidance is, I know we want to do some AI work, and I've been looking at some technologies or these LLMs, and tell me about Bedrock or SageMaker or whatever it might be. The accessibility to services and technologies that you don't have ready at hand in the data center or marketplace.
Yep.
Partners, right, that are right there pre-integrated or have a much easier path to become implemented. And part of that, and I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, imagine part of that journey is helping people navigate through that. Well, this is a good choice to make. Now we can kind of plan for what you want to do with AI, or you already started. So let's look at this service, either from AWS or a partner, that kind of thing. So it's not just the bits and bytes and storage and speeds and feeds and apps. It's really kind of the whole ecosystem. Am I on track there?
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. The agility of it is incredible, especially once you land. And Bedrock was a great call out. We help a ton of customers utilize that, and they're able to do it very quickly, get it ramped up and get tested at whatever their proof of concept might be. It's so fast to be able to do. It's great. I do see we have a couple questions in the Q&A. I see one that I think I can answer. It looks like the question is, we have a heavy VDI on-prem environment and are looking to have some cloud presence for BC and scalability. Can you say if there's a huge advantage of using AWS versus Azure? Frankly, I'm not sure, or I don't know of any advantage period between the two. I think it's both the same, if that's fair. So if you're in one cloud, if you're in AWS, using the VDI, using Windows remote desktop systems, workspaces is the same. There's no real distinct difference. AWS runs more Windows systems than Azure, so you're fine. It's not like you're going to be lacking any features or anything like that. But workspaces within AWS is just that. It's Windows systems that you're logging into. There are a lot of advantages within AWS I'm aware of when it comes to the integrations with the platform. So I would very much recommend, if you are going to AWS, that's where you want your VDIs to be. There's going to be a lot of advantages to doing that. But in general, they're the same thing. There's no real difference when it comes to using like a remote desktop system.
Yeah, and I was going to try to answer that in chat, but I was insufficiently skilled at multitasking to do it. The thing I would add to what Zach is saying, and he alluded to it, is that the underlying cloud strategy probably drives the VDI choice more than the VDI choice should be driving the underlying cloud strategy. So
Yeah.
a little bit of it looks a lot like, what is your 1, 3, 5-year plan for cloud adoption? And if there isn't one, you might be a little bit behind on that. That might be something to touch on with leadership, of like making sure that whatever decisions made around VDI and scalability for that is aligned with the future cloud roadmap.
I want to. We're almost, time's flown by here. I wish we had another hour to spend with both of you. Maybe the wrap up thing to do is, all of us go through this choosing a partner and who to work with, and kind of what my own assessment criteria are. If you can share, you're obviously on the end of the being chosen to work with side of it. What are some of the good questions that customers ask or potential partners ask of you, or things that they might consider? Maybe we'll open up the table a bit more. You kind of why Caylent and what some of your distinct advantages or differentiators might be. Can you kind of help us put some more meat on that bone?
Yeah, I mean, I think without getting into the pitch a little bit, because there's reasons to use a partner. I think if I'm sitting on the customer side, I'm looking a little bit at work style, probably, like understanding what is it like day to day to work with this partner, and does it fit my company's expectations of how we'd like to work internally. If there's a mismatch in work styles, it's gonna be difficult to get through that project. If you are more collaborative than your partner wants to be, or less, it's going to be potentially challenging for those reasons. And it's one of the reasons that we try to be clear at Caylent about like taking what we would call a quote unquote do with approach with our customers. That sounds great. Like, you don't get something thrown over the wall, if you will, at the end of a project. But really, the flip side of that too is that we require some customer interaction to be following along with the project, to be giving us feedback on at least a weekly basis, and ideally be read in more quickly than that. So, does your team have that bandwidth able to carve out to provide guidance and to shadow a partner engagement, and is that expected? I think beyond culture fit, obviously expertise and understanding if there's if there's a reference, or in the case of like AWS, sometimes provides our reference, if you will. They've seen us work across a number of clients. The AWS account rep, if you're an AWS customer, can be a good source of information of like, okay, I've got, is this partner reputable? Have they delivered success? And could be another way to make sure that you're not just getting the partner's top 3 referenceable clients, the only 3 that they had success with. And then, potentially challenge to understand what the escalation processes will work, what mechanisms are in place for just a solid project management, and understanding whether you're getting just staff, if you're getting just folks that you're going to have to redirect, or is this a partnership where the partner you're working with is going to be managing their project to your success, making sure that you're not dealing, you don't have a second job managing these resources that are on for the project or whatever engagement. Mitch, what do you ask for? You've worked with partners as well. I'm curious your point of view.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I had a few thoughts too about it, and I think I'm making this transition 3 times to the cloud with different organizations. Had a partner each time, and there are several reasons. One of them is, again, it's that you don't know what you don't know. So on the financial side, it's what are the costs that I need to expect, and how do we kind of build not only the ROI but the operating model. What are the advantages that I can gain that I'm not thinking of because I'm not that familiar with working in the cloud? It can be the services and technologies. It can be how I do releases of software when I have more, CPU virtual systems available to me than I might have in a private data center. It might also, then the third piece of it is, here's where the company's going. Here's where my business is going. I'm being asked to do these things, whether it's in development or in operations. We're expanding our footprint. We're entering different markets. We're doing some things to cost save here, but we're being more aggressive about offering products and services. Bring the business strategy to it, lay that on the table and say, it's not just moving. I want to move and do these things either as a step towards that, or when I get there to be able to execute on that. And I think I think I know what that conversation would be like with you two already talking with you, but pretty quick who the folks that can think not just the get there strategy, but get to the 2, 3, 5-year yard line of the company. So you're aligned to do what the business needs you to do, not just what you need to do inside your respective function. It makes sense. I imagine you get asked that once in a while.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good call out. The idea of whether you're driving strategic thought leadership and setting a North Star and helping customers understand like how to move towards the current best practices, I think is a great call out, in addition to just being able to lead that conversation rather than being simply hands on keyboard executing tasks that I don't think anybody else needs. Most people don't need another project to manage directly hands on that way. So I think that is a value add. I think like looking at it too, that comes into a couple of areas we're thinking about in terms of why to use a partner as well. Like didn't fully touch on there is the expertise. So somebody that's done it enough times to be able to do it the first time for you, and then also somebody that's willing and able to mentor staff and bring them up to speed. Staff coming from VMware have a transition to make, and we're thoughtful about that in the way that we do our projects, making sure that staff at the end of the day aren't mystified by an AWS environment that doesn't run anything like their VMware environment. Bridging that knowledge gap and that skills gap throughout the project with hands-on experience is super helpful. Beyond that, like you said, the bandwidth of running, you're going to be running in 2 places for a little while, or maybe 49 places instead of 48 while that's burning down for more complex. And I think having the bandwidth to help manage that sort of bubble in complexity, I think, is another reason to use a partner. And then we talked about the modernization and thought leadership, which I think is critical. So I think it's relatively easy, and we've seen partners that will happily do a lift and shift and get folks no more modern than they are today and leave it at that and call their jobs done and wipe their hands of it. And I think that sets customers up for a surprise. Like, you do have to take some advantage of the cloud to make it cost effective when moving.
Fantastic. Zach, anything you want to add? I mean, you're very much part of those discussions.
Sure. I mean, I fully agree. Yeah, I think that we see the most success when we do with the customer, when we onboard them, when we help them kind of adjust to the new environment, because that, like, I think if anyone's been through that journey of going from kind of, let's say, a classic on-prem ClickOps type stuff to a more of an automated DevOps environment within AWS, it's a big transition. It is a tough transition to make. And understanding how to kind of, think about those things and being, honestly, having someone that you can ask who's not maybe a team member, or someone that you can say, hey, how do you do this? And you can, get good answers and build trust with and learn from is something that we like helping customers with.
Well, excellent. Like I said, we could go another hour. Maybe we'll have an after the show. We can do that like they do on HBO once in a while. But thanks, Mark. Thanks, Zach, to you both sharing with us, and being real transparent about some things to consider and some experiences that you have. And I think it's been very helpful. I want to say thank you to our audience. Also, have been super great with questions and asking the VDI. I've never thought that might come up, but of course, yeah, that's part of your environment, part of your infrastructure, and what you operate. So that's part of the question too. You want to ask all of those things, and working a partner could certainly help you do that. So I want to say thanks to Kelsey, who's also been on the team helping us put together our conversation today and getting the three of us to show up on time. Part of what we're doing here. And thank both Caylent and AWS for putting on, or sponsoring, I should say, our conversation today. Please fill out that survey if you have a minute left before you run to your next Zoom call, team call, whatever it might be. And I want to hand it back to Amanda. We'll close things out.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. This has been a great conversation. I've been listening in best I can, trying to follow along. But it's been an engaging conversation, a lot of great questions. So thank you, all of you, for your engagement today, and it's always appreciated. So a couple things before we close out, just a reminder to take our survey. It's 1 minute of your time, lets us know how we're doing, what you've thought about today's session, and that's invaluable to us, allows us to continue to create great programs like these. Also, we will email you a link to view the on-demand recording, as the session has been recorded as well. And then most of all, thank you to our speakers, Zach, Mark, and of course, Mitch. Thanks for moderating today. Appreciate you. And with that being said, we thank you all for joining us, and thanks for joining this TechStrong learning experience. We hope you have a good day.
Thanks for hosting us, Amanda and Mitch. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye for now.